Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. Happy New Year to all of you. This is the first podcast of 2018. Wow, you guys are pretty excited. I am too, because we have Fredric Brown on the show.
He, sir, is quite dead.
Well, what I mean to say is that we have one of his stories.
Well, okay then.
Also, Ike from Atlanta tells his Bigfoot story, and we hear a CBC broadcast from 1956.
Wow!
So, let's get this party started with this 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by astrology, the study of the movement of celestial bodies. Not to be confused by an astrologer, who is a person who uses astrology to tell others about their future.
Listen, my dear Cecilia, I've stood for your nonsense long enough. Don't you think I've noticed you and Robert? Oh, I have noticed. I've seen. I think it's about time for a change, a drastic change. Hello, what are you doing up this hour? That gun. What are you going to do with that gun? Oh, put that gun down. Don't you? Don't. Oh. Oh. The scorpion. The scorpion.
That's how my brother died, Inspector. I see. I thought when I found this record on his dictaphone that it might contain some clues to his murder. It doesn't tell us a thing.
Don't be so sure, Mr. Spencer.
What do you mean?
Well, your brother mentioned the word scorpion. That might mean something.
I hope so.
By the way, Mr. Spencer, what was your brother dictating when he was killed?
He was finishing up his new play.
I see. Well, I guess I've seen enough in here.
Would you like to meet the others?
Yes, I would.
They're in the library. Right through this door, Inspector. Boys, I want you to meet Inspector Harris. Inspector, this is Roger DeHaven.
How do you do, Inspector?
This is Professor Marco.
How do you do, Inspector?
Professor?
Well, I'm not the real professor. That is just my professional name. You see, I'm an astrologer. I tell fortunes by the stars.
Why are you all here?
You see, Inspector, Professor Marco, Roger DeHaven, my brother, and I are all members of the same club.
And it so happens that all of us have birthdays in the same week, so each year we all come up here and celebrate.
Does the word scorpion mean anything to any of you?
Scorpion? No, it doesn't mean anything to me.
Why do you ask, Inspector?
Well, you see, before Spencer died, he was dictating a scene for his new play over the dictaphone. He was interrupted when someone came in and shot him. With his dying breath, he repeated the word scorpion several times.
Say, Inspector, isn't the scorpion a sign of death?
Yes, but I don't think he meant that. No, I think he was trying to give us a clue as to the identity of his murderer. Of course. Why didn't I think of it before?
What do you mean, Inspector?
I know what your brother was trying to say when he referred to the scorpion.
You do?
Yes. And I'm arresting you, Professor Marco, for the murder of Howard Spencer.
How does the inspector know that Professor Marco is the murderer? We'll give you the solution in just a moment, but first...
Okay, so many points to make and only 45 seconds to make them. First off, the zodiac sign is Scorpio and not Scorpion. The guy most definitely said Scorpion. Second, they were all of the same sign, so that is also clear. This is sounding like another thin one, so let's continue on and see if I'm right. My guess is that the dead guy should have said Professor.
And now, back to our story.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Marco has confessed to his crime. Spencer's reference to a scorpion puzzled me for a while. But then I realized that a scorpion is also a sign of the zodiac. But that didn't mean anything either, since it refers to people born in November, and all the people concerned in this case had their birthdays this week. Then I concluded that Spencer was referring to the zodiac as a whole. And was there anyone in this case who could be associated with the zodiac? Yes, Professor Marco, the astrologer, who tells fortunes by the stars.
Yep, the professor is a real scorpion. Now, had I been shot and had time to call out my killer, I might not have been so cryptic. Oh well. This 5-minute mystery was brought to you by astrology and cryptozoology, which of course is the study of making and breaking codes. Well, here we are with a shiny new year. Rudolph would be proud. This year at Ron's Amazing Stories, we'll be moving forward with a whole new attitude. We're going to have more stories by you guys, more guests to talk about their stories, and of course, make the numbers climb up the charts. 2017 was a very good year for growth, and I hope to make 2018 even better. I love doing this podcast, and it's quite clear to me that there are a whole lot of you that like it too. Thank you for that. I have some new ideas for the show, and as we go, I hope that your feedback and continued support help make Ron's Amazing Stories even better for 2018. To start this year off right, Ike, who's stationed somewhere in Afghanistan, sends us his tale. If this one doesn't curl your toes, you just might want to have them checked. Ike writes, "Hello, Ron. It took me a while to get up the courage to send you my story. I currently train Afghans in tactics and intelligence gathering. This means I go out in the field and meet with leaders and their police force. It is rewarding, and most appreciate what we're trying to do. The story I'm going to tell you has nothing to do with my current job. It happened to me while I was training at Fort Jackson. My buddy and I are both from Atlanta and decided to travel home together during Christmas. My dad planned a late-season hunting trip. We set up our camp along a river. As it happens, we experienced one of the warmest hunting days in the year. Not shorts and tank top weather, but not the normal bitter cold that represents the mountains in December. We were looking to bag us a deer before the end of the season. The first night was just getting things set up and having a fantastic dinner. Our tents were spaced out about 20 yards apart because my buddy snores quite loud and violently. His tent was facing the front of the trail, and mine and my dad's were butted up against some blackberry bushes. Early that afternoon, I tried to get some game birds to fly into camp by throwing some bread chunks between the tents. No dice. Being a little tired from traveling, we decided to turn in a little early and get a fresh start in the morning. Around 2 a.m., I heard my buddy walking around the camp. He walked behind my tent between the blackberries and finally stopped at the door to my tent. Just before I asked him, "What's up?" I heard snoring. It was coming from the tent some 20 yards away. My heart began to beat at a rate I didn't think was humanly possible. It felt like my chest was going to explode. I listened closely to the ground, and I heard the thing walk back over towards my buddy's tent. It was quiet for a bit and then started moving again, stopping just about where my dad was camped. I heard a splash at the river, and at that moment I decided it was far enough I might get a good look. I threw my tent up, flashlight blazing. The fog was so thick I could barely see the river, but something was there. Something tall enough that 4 feet of water only came to just above its knees. It ran deeper into the water and then disappeared. The next morning, I asked my buddy and Dad if any of them got up during the night and walked around camp. My buddy said, "No, I thought it was you." And my dad said, No, it wasn't me." I have no idea what I saw. I know it wasn't a bear or anything like that because it stood on 2 feet and moved through the swift-running river current like it was a crick. By the way, all of the bread chunks that I had laid down were gone. Ike from Atlanta, Georgia. Well, Ike, first let me say thank you for your service. It is an honor to have your story. Second, let me say, wow. I've heard that the northern mountains of Georgia are a hotbed for Bigfoot sightings. You didn't say where this happened or what you saw was Bigfoot, but my guess is that's what it was. A truly toe-curling, scary story. Thank you, Ike. Now, if you want to share your story like Ike did, all you gotta do is go to ronsamazingstories.com, click on the Contact tab, and start writing. Maybe you just send me an idea for what your story is, or maybe you send me just a snippet, and we go from there. Or maybe you write the whole thing out and I read it just like I read Ike's today. No matter what you do, go to ronsamazingstories.com and click on that Contact tab today. We need your stories. Thank you again, Ike. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. Knock by Fredric Brown is our OTR story for this episode. The last man on Earth, following an alien invasion, becomes an exhibit in a zoo set up by the invaders to showcase the flora and fauna of a conquered planet. It is based on the short story published by Brown in Thrilling Wonder Stories, December 1948. Our version comes from the X-1 radio series, which aired on NBC from 1955 to 1958. The stories for the show came from 2 of the most popular science fiction magazines at the time, Astounding and Galaxy. Adaptations for these stories were written by Ernest Kinoy and George Lefferts. They even wrote a few of their own stories. Knock first aired on X-1 on May 22nd, 1951.
Countdown for blastoff. X-5, -4, -3, -2, X-1. Fire! From the far horizons of the unknown come transcribed tales of new dimensions in time and space. These are stories of the future, adventures in which you'll live in 1,000,000 could-be years on 1,000 would-be worlds. The National Broadcasting Company presents X, minus 1. Tonight, the science fiction classic, Knock, by Fredric Brown. Tonight we have a strange story to tell. A sweet, blood-curdling little story that is really only 2 sentences long. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. What's that?
Good morning, man.
What? Who are you?
You have regained consciousness.
Who are you?
I am Zan.
I'm still asleep, I must be.
You are not asleep.
Maybe if I close my eyes, it'll go away.
I will not go away, man.
Oh, I guess I'm awake. What are you?
I am a Zan.
What's that?
A Zan is intelligent life.
Look, I don't... What happened? Where are you from?
From Planet 7 in the 3rd galaxy in the 4th quadrant.
Where?
It is not necessary to repeat information which is correct in the original statement.
Planet 7, but...
You mean I'm not on Earth?
You are still on your planet.
Then what are you doing here?
The Zans have annexed your world.
You mean you've conquered Earth?
Yes, that is correct. We will now prepare your planet for habitation by the Zan.
How about the people? What about the population of the world?
You are the population of the world.
Hmm? Now, wait a minute. I don't understand what's happened.
The Zan have landed on your planet. We have removed the lower life forms to prepare for colonization by the Zan.
When did all this happen?
2 days ago. You have been unconscious until now.
You really mean I'm the last man on Earth?
That is correct. Identify yourself now.
What?
Kindly provide data as to your position in the elementary social order of your planet.
Oh. I'm Walter Phelan, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Nathan University. How do you speak English?
We have deciphered your written and recorded records. It is not difficult to reconstruct your language. It is a primary type of auditory communication.
Oh.
Is there anything you want to complete your natural habitat?
You mean I'm a prisoner?
That is correct. What will you want further in your room?
Do I have to stay here?
Yes.
The rest of my life?
Forever.
You better bring me my books.
That will be done.
That's rather considerate of you. You know, I've got to call you something. Do you mind if I call you George?
It is immaterial. I will be back, Associate Professor of Anthropology.
Oh, that's all right, George. Just call me Walter.
Very well, Walter. I will be back with your books.
All right, George. I'll be seeing you around.
You will not be around, Walter. You will be here.
Come in. Oh, hello, George.
Hello, Walter.
Wait a minute. You're not George. You're different somehow.
It makes no difference. The Zan are many, and they are one.
Then I'll call you George, too. I'll call you old George. What can I do for you?
Point 1. You will please henceforth sit with your chair facing the other way.
Uh-huh. I thought so, George. That plain wall is different from the other side, isn't it?
That is correct. It is transparent.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm in a zoo, right?
That is correct.
How many other animals do you have in the zoo, George?
216.
Not complete, George. Even a Bush League zoo could beat that. Did you just pick at random?
Yes. All species would have been too many. Male and female, each of 108 kinds.
Male and female, huh? Of all the animals?
There is a female of your species among the collection.
Anyone I know? Well, never mind. It doesn't matter anyway. Well, what do you feed us all, eh?
For carnivorous species, we make synthetics. The flora was not hurt by the vibrations which destroyed animal life.
Oh, nice for the flora. Well, George, you started out with point 1. I deduce there is a point 2 kicking around somewhere. What is it?
Something we do not understand.
Oh?
2 of the other animals sleep and do not wake. They are cold.
Don't worry, George. It happens in the best regulated zoos.
What is wrong with them, Walter?
Nothing much. They're just dead.
Dead?
Mm-hmm.
That means stopped. But nothing stopped them. Each was alone.
Well, maybe they just died of old age.
Old age? I do not understand.
You don't? Well, how old are you, George?
Your planet went around the sun about 7,000 times since I was born.
7,000 years?
Yes, I am still young.
Yeah, a babe in arms. Look, George, you've got something to learn about this planet you've hijacked. Here on Earth, we've got somebody you don't know where you come from. An old man with a beard and an hourglass and a scythe. Your vibrations didn't kill him.
What is he?
Oh, old man Death. Down here, our people and animals live until somebody, the Grim Reaper, stops them.
He will stop more?
Well, he gets us all, George. With your lifespan, it won't seem like a minute and we'll all be gone. Looks like you made a mistake, George. And I don't think there's much you can do about it.
That is not correct. The Zan is a logical being. We will take action.
Well, George, where are you taking me?
We will be there shortly. We will bring your books and your chair.
You mean my lease is up?
I do not understand.
It's moving day?
That is correct. We are here now. You will live here now, Walter. It is a larger room.
Well, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home.
Go inside.
Oh, be careful with those books, George. Don't lose my... Oh, excuse me.
Who are you? What are you doing here?
I guess George didn't explain. George tries to be polite, but he hasn't quite caught on yet. I'm Walter Phelan.
My name is Grace Evans, Mr. Phelan. What's all this about? Why did they bring me here?
I think I know why, but let's go back a bit. Do you know just what has happened otherwise?
No, not exactly.
Well, I've been talking to George.
George?
Well, that's what I call them, all of them. There's no way to tell them apart anyway. There aren't many of them here yet. They come from outside the solar system, sort of an advanced scouting party.
I saw their spaceship. It's as big as a mountain.
Yeah, they're moving in on us. They cleaned off the Earth with some kind of vibration. It destroys all sorts of animal life. I don't know whether they did it all at once or if they had to circle the Earth a few times, but they killed everybody.
No. I was afraid
The cheerful note is that you and I and 200-odd other animals were picked up beforehand as specimens for the zoo. You do know this is a zoo, don't you?
I suspected it. But I don't remember anything about being captured. I just woke up here.
Well, my hunch is they used the vibrations just low enough to knock us all out. And then they cruised around, picking up samples at random. When they were all set, they turned the juice on full blast.
How terrible.
Yeah, well, they solved a lot of problems for us. Housing shortage, wars, even the atomic bomb. I don't suppose the human race, you and I, have to worry about anything now.
It's awful.
Only they made a mistake. They underestimated us.
I don't understand.
They thought we were immortal.
That we were what?
Immortal, like they are. Oh, they can be killed, but the Zans don't know what natural death is. They didn't know anyway until they lost two of us yesterday.
You mean there are more than two of us?
Oh, not more of our species, no. These were merely fellow animals, a rabbit and a canary. And by the Zan's way of figuring time, the rest of us are only good for a few minutes apiece. It's a joke on them. They figured they had permanent specimens here in the zoo.
Well, didn't they even know we'd all die eventually?
I don't think so. George, that is the second Zan I saw, told me he was 7,000 years old, and he's young by their standards. When they learned how quickly we die, they were practically shocked to the core, if they have cores.
How can you talk that way about it?
Academic detachment. I learned it at faculty teas. At any rate, they've decided to reorganize their zoo. 2 by 2.
What, are they going to keep us locked up together in this one little room?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. There's plenty of furniture, though, and George promised to bring me my chair.
We've got to do something.
Why?
Well, I don't know. It just seems to me we owe it to the human race to do something.
Oh, well, perhaps you have a suggestion?
There must be some way. They can be killed, you said.
Oh, yes, I've been studying them. They look horribly different, but I think they have about the same metabolic and digestive system as we. I think that anything that would kill one of us would kill one of them.
But you said 7,000 years.
Yeah, I think I figured it out. Now, George cut his, I suppose you'd call it his hand, when he brought in my books. It started to bleed, red blood. But I could see the cut closing as he stood there. By the time he left, it was healed.
I don't understand.
Well, you see, whatever factor there is in man that makes him grow old is missing in the Zan. Their regenerative powers must be unlimited. They just don't wear out. They go on and on until they're stopped.
Suppose we killed one. There must be some way.
Oh, what would be the use? They wouldn't even punish us. They'd just give us our food through a trapdoor and put up a sign saying, "Beware of the man. Dangerous."
I don't think they'll even have to bother in your case. I don't see anything funny.
I'm sorry. It just reminds me of Martha.
Martha?
My wife. She died 2 years ago.
I'm sorry.
Oh, not at all. It was a pleasure. That'll be George with my books. Come in. Hello, George.
Hello, Walter. Point 1, I have brought your books.
Point 1, eh? What else is on your mind?
Another creature sleeps and will not wake.
Oh?
A small feathered one called a duck.
Well, it happens, George. I warned you. Old Man Death, the Grim Reaper. I told you about him.
Walter, the Council of Zan has met. It has been decided logically that A, no life form can withstand the full-strength vibrations with which we cleared your planet. Therefore, the Grim Reaper you spoke of does not exist.
Pretty neat, George. What's B?
B, the only intelligent life to escape the vibrations is you. Therefore, the logical conclusion is you are stopping these animals by some means unknown to us.
George, you are off your trolley.
You will tell me now how this is done.
You've got me.
Yes, we have. It is necessary to save the remaining specimens as long as possible. If we do not get the information, we may be forced to dispense with your species entirely. This means you, Walter, and the female.
Now, hold on, George. Don't go off half-cocked. Let me take a look at these animals that won't wake up.
I will take you there now. Go first, Walter.
After you, my dear George.
This is the weasel.
Now, you should have got him in the winter, George. The fur's worth more then. It's ermine.
This is the reptile cage.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the ducks. That is the male. The female has been stopped.
Yeah, lucky girl. What's the matter, fellow? Lonely?
Walter, you will tell me how you stopped the female duck.
Oh, you got me, George. I didn't do it. Maybe she died of the Dutch elm blight.
Walter, you are not being logical. We have concluded you are stopping these animals. Tell us now how it is done.
I've told you, George. I haven't the foggiest notion.
Very well. We will have to take further action.
Oh, what are you going to do, George?
We will go back now to your room.
What happened, Mr. Phelan?
You might call me Walter. After all, George does. And we have more in common.
Please, what happened?
Oh, just a dead duck. George thinks I killed her by remote control. He wants me to tell him how.
Did you?
Look, I'm just an ordinary anthropologist. There's no telling what those animals died of, just natural causes. But George can't see it that way. He thinks I'm holding out on him.
Good.
What?
At least we can get back at them some way. At least we can do something to them.
Well, why? After all, George isn't a bad fellow, if you like an ant mentality.
How can you say that? Well, they murdered the human race.
I suppose so, but we can't change that now, so why think about it?
We just can't sit here and do nothing.
I fail to see how we can do anything else.
But at least we could be fighting.
I can't see the virtue in that. I was more or less content with my books, and we've got George to talk to.
Of all the men in the world they had to pick, don't you want to fight back? Don't you want to keep on fighting to the end?
It hadn't occurred to me.
But we've got to, Walter.
Why?
Well, I can't really explain it, but, Walter, if there was any good in man, it was that he kept on struggling against nature and, in the end, even against himself. But he kept on fighting for what he thought was right, and we're all that's left. Walter, we just can't end by giving up. We've got to keep on fighting.
You know, you do remind me of Martha.
There isn't much left for us. We could beat them in this one small thing. We can pretend there's a secret about death. We could refuse to tell them anything.
Well, there isn't anything to tell.
But they don't know that. Promise me you won't give in.
Well, I suppose the worst they can do is kill us. All right, Miss Evans. Hello, George.
Hello, Walter. Now you will tell us how these animals are stopped.
George, this may come as a shock to you, but I've decided not to tell you.
Why?
Oh, a romantic attachment to lost causes. My grandfather was a Confederate officer.
Walter, you are not being logical.
Neither was my grandfather. He charged a Yankee battery with one round of ammunition and a corncob pipe.
You are not logical, but that is expected in lower life forms. You will come with me now, Walter.
Where are you taking him?
To the second level. Go now, Walter.
You won't tell them.
I can't guarantee anything, but as of now, I don't intend to.
We've got to fight, Walter. Remember that. We've got to go out fighting.
Yes. Yes, I think you're right.
Go now, Walter.
Goodbye.
It's been a pleasure, Miss Evans.
I am waiting. Go now, Walter.
After you, my dear George.
You will tell us now, Walter? That was the first level of vibration. There are many more. However, we have calculated that none of them exceed your threshold of unconsciousness.
Oh, very clever, George.
Of course. You will tell us now, how do you stop these animals? You will tell us now?
As of now, no. However, I'm not very brave, if that encourages you, George.
You are not being logical, Walter.
You're telling me.
We will now use vibration level 2. Walter, you are still conscious.
Let me alone, George.
You will tell us now how you stop the animals?
Let me alone.
We have had vibration levels 1 and 2. There are still 15 more before your threshold of unconsciousness.
No. Let me alone.
Walter, listen to me. Another creature sleeps and will not wake. We must know now.
It's tough. You better start vibrating again, George.
No.
What?
It would not be logical. We have calculated that no further level of vibration will overcome your irrational psychological block. We conclude you will not tell.
And let me go?
That is correct.
That's real nice of you, George. I appreciate it.
We have calculated that the resistance of the female of your species will be lower. We will now place her under the vibrations.
No, George, you can't do that. No, listen, George. George, there is no secret. Can you understand that? There is no secret. Those animals died from natural causes. I'm telling you the truth.
That is not a logical answer. We will get the woman.
I've told you the truth. Can't you understand?
We must know now. The female animal cage next to the duck has been stopped. We must preserve the survivor.
The animal next to the duck?
We will bring the woman here. She will tell us after the vibration.
No. Listen, George. You want the truth? You want to know how to save the mates of the animals that have been stopped?
You will tell us now?
Yes, I'll tell you now. I give up. But you've got to promise to leave the woman alone. You promise, George?
If we receive the answer from you, Walter, there will be no further need for the vibrations.
Well, I guess that'll have to do. All right. All right. Take me to that stopped animal. I'll tell you how to save the mate.
Very well, Walter. You are being logical now. We will go.
Walter, are you all right?
Just let me catch my breath a minute.
What did they do? What happened?
After a while, I told them what they wanted to know.
Oh, no.
As George pointed out, it seemed to be the logical thing at the time.
But you promised.
I know.
It was our last chance to beat them on even one little thing.
Perhaps. You mind if I sit down?
You gave up.
I suppose you could call it that. I'm very tired.
They've beaten us completely, then. There isn't even anything we can do. The last of the human race, and we give up. We don't even die fighting.
Oh, it isn't that bad. Something might turn up, Martha.
What did you call me?
Huh? No, I must have said Martha. Sorry, she was my wife. She died 2 years ago. What were you saying?
Nothing. It doesn't matter. It's too late. It's too late for the whole human race.
What now, George?
The Council of the Zan has met.
No? Something wrong, George?
A Zan has been stopped.
What?
Zan is dead?
That is correct.
Well, you didn't believe me, George. But you can die. You can really die. You'll have to get used to that if you're going to stay here.
The Council has decided. A, you have in some way stopped this Zan. B, you and the woman must be eliminated.
Walter.
No, you've got it wrong, George.
The Council has decided. This time you will have the full vibration.
This time? Walter, what did they do to you?
Oh, they have a rather effective third degree.
They tortured you, Walter?
Yes.
And I thought... Oh, Walter, it was all my fault.
I wouldn't even have tried without you. I suppose we have a last chance now to end with some dignity.
I think you're a very brave man, Walter.
No, not very. There isn't much else to do. Do we go now, George?
Now, Walter. Wait.
What's that?
I have been told another Zan has died.
Now will you believe me?
The Council of the Zan meets now.
2 gone already, and you were with me, George. You know I didn't kill this one.
What stopped him then?
I told you, it's Old Man Death. You came to the wrong planet, George. Your immortality doesn't go down here. He can stop you, but you can't stop him. And you'll all die if you stick around. What now?
The Council has decided. This is a place of death. We will leave your planet.
Leave? You mean you're giving up?
It is not safe for the Zan.
Oh, Walter, they're leaving. They're really going.
Go on then, George. And don't hurry back.
It would not be logical to do so. We are leaving the Earth now. Goodbye, Walter.
Goodbye, George. Well, they're all aboard now.
So wonderful to feel the sun and the wind again.
Yeah, they've closed the hatches.
Walter, is it safe for us to be out here?
Yes, they're not interested in us any longer. They only want to get away. And I want to see this, Grace. The Zan, leaving Earth forever. They're blasting off.
There they go.
Yes, it's all over now. Well, I suppose we might as well go back in.
I still don't understand. Walter, what made them go?
I just told them the facts of life.
Of death, you mean?
No, of life. After all, I thought George was old enough to know. At 7,000 years, he was going to be a pretty big boy.
I wish you'd stop joking and tell me what happened.
Look out for the step. Well, you remember when the first animals died?
The rabbit and the duck?
Yeah, and their mates just started to pine and waste away?
Yes.
Well, that worried the Zan. They wanted to keep the last specimens alive if they could. So finally, I broke down and told them about affection.
Affection?
Yes. And then I introduced Donald.
Donald, who's that?
Here we are. Grace, meet Donald.
Oh, Walter, please, what does affection have to do with it?
That's what the Zan wanted to know. I told him it was love that made the world go round. That having lost his mate, Donald would die immediately unless he had affection and constant petting.
Petting?
I even showed him how. Here, fella, come on. Come here. Yeah. I held Donald in my arms, and I petted him a while. Then I let the Zan take over with the animal in the next cage.
What animal?
Take a look.
You mean this cage?
Mm-hmm. Watch out. Don't go too close.
Walter, it's a rattlesnake.
Yes. Their metabolism made it impossible for them to die of old age, but I had a hunch that they could be poisoned.
Well, then it was the snake that killed the two Zan.
Mm-hmm. They never even knew what bit them.
Then you outwitted them, Walter.
Well, I suppose...
I thought you'd just given up. Oh, Walter, I'm so ashamed.
You don't have to be. I had given up. I probably wouldn't have fought if you hadn't pushed me. Well, we've got a world to plan. A new world, Grace.
I know.
We'll have to decide which animals to let out of the zoo and which ones it'd be safer to keep in. But first, there's a bigger problem.
What's that?
The human race.
Oh.
We've got to make a decision about that. Pretty important one.
Yes, but...
It's been a nice race, even if nobody won it. Of course, it may go backward for a while until it gets its breath, but we can save the books and all the most important things and get it started ahead once more.
No.
It's the Garden of Eden all over again. But Eve, you'll have to watch out for that snake.
Now, don't be ridiculous, Walter.
Funny, you even blush like Martha. Only you're stronger than she was. Prettier, too.
I wish you'd forget about Martha.
I think I will, my dear, if you'll give me time.
Now, Walter Phelan, you listen to me. If you think for 1 minute that
I thought it would never happen to me again. But it is love that makes the world go round. So, Grace, if you could only...
No. I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on earth.
But that's exactly what I am.
I don't care. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm going out.
All right, my dear, but think it over. And please come back.
You see, I told you. It wasn't really so horrible, our story. Remember how it goes? The last man on earth sat alone in a room. And then there was a knock on the door.
Come in. Come in, Grace, my dear.
You see, it wasn't horrible at all. In just a moment, a word about next week's adventure. Tonight, by transcription, X-1 has brought you Knock by Fredric Brown, adapted for radio by Ernest Kinoy. Featured in the cast were Alex Scorby as Walter, Laurie March as Grace, and Louis Van Ruten as the Zan. X-1 was directed by Fred Way and is an NBC Radio Network production.
This is one of those classic science fiction tales that is remembered oh so fondly. Far and away, the best part of the story are the first two sentences from the opening, which raises all sorts of exciting questions in the mind of the listener. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There's a knock at the door. Why is this person the last man on Earth? What room is he in, and where is it? And most intriguing of all, who or what could be knocking at his door? I remember back in high school, my English teacher brought us these words and told us to write a story. Mine was nothing like you heard today. In fact, it was quite dreadful. But it did get a B grade. At least it was well written, is what my teacher told me. Now I ask you, what would your story be? It's worth a thought or two. The date is January 26, 1956, and this is A Moment in Time. What you're about to hear is a special program from the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. They have been on the air in one form or another since November 2nd, 1936. CBC News is the largest broadcast news gathering operation in Canada. The program you're about to hear speaks for itself, so please enjoy this little time capsule from over 60 years ago.
Your best story, tonight's assignment abroad for 4 veteran broadcasters. On January 1st of this year, the CBC News Service was 15 years old. Part of that service is the reporting of CBC correspondents in London, Paris, Washington, and the United Nations. Recently, we asked all 4 men to choose the most interesting assignment they have covered in their years abroad. And tonight, you'll hear the choices of Matthew Halton, Peter Stursberg, Douglas LaChance, and James M. Menifee. Senior in years of service is Matthew Halton in London, whose assignments began in the most exciting days of the war. Now here is his account of May the 8th, 1945.
I think it was the day when I reported the end of the world. That is, something that looked like the end of the world. Berlin on VE Day. A day earlier, General Eisenhower had taken the unconditional surrender of the German armies at his headquarters in France. The next day, Air Marshal Tedder, who was Eisenhower's British deputy, flew into Berlin to join the Russian commander, Marshal Zhukov, in a similar ceremony. He could take with him only 10 of the hundreds of war correspondents, and I had the luck to be one of them. It was a lovely day, and the heart of the world seemed to be soaring with joy. We flew over the skeleton of Cologne Cathedral and over the Rhine. At the Elbe, Russian fighters met us and escorted us into Berlin. And we flew into a vast cloud of smoke and dust. The great city of 5 million people was still smoking and burning. And when we came down through this cloud and saw what we saw, we were all speechless. 4 out of 5 buildings in Berlin had been destroyed. That is, completely leveled or completely gutted. This did look like the end of the world. On Tempelhof Airfield, in that appalling scene of ruin, Marshal Tedder took the salute in a march past of 10,000 Russian guards. Then we were driven to Zhukov's headquarters, through the rubble and ashes of Berlin. I didn't recognize famous streets I had known well. In that long, appalling drive, we saw only 9 or 10 Berliners, old men and women, scarecrows, crawling out frightened to see the British and American flags. Just before midnight, we saw the German, Field Marshal Keitel. He was hanged later. We saw him slowly strip off his glove and sign the surrender. Then the Russians gave us a banquet that lasted all night. In the morning, we went out again into the fearful scene. The Russians took us to see the smoking ruins of Hitler's famous marble chancellery, but they didn't show us the bunker where he died. As we left, my car was the last in the procession, and at one point, in the clouds of dust, my driver lost the others. We were lost for a few minutes in that utter ruin and silence, in the end of the world. I was afraid. But soon we were in the airplane again, flying out of the ruin into the bright smile of France and the sunshine of victory and peace. This is Matthew Halton speaking from London.
For the last 5 years, Peter Stursberg has covered the United Nations for the CBC, but for his story tonight, he goes back to the days when he was one of our war correspondents.
It was only the other day that I realized how I came to be the first to broadcast the song of the last war, Lily Marlene. I was reading Dennis Johnston's memoirs, 9 Rivers from Jordan, in which he tells how he used to listen to Lily Marlene while waiting for the Battle of Alamein. The British Tommies called it their bedtime song. And sitting on the sand in the sparkling desert night with the wireless tuned in to Radio Beograd, Dennis Johnston, who was a BBC correspondent, marveled at the way a German girl was singing the opposing armies to sleep. He prepared a broadcast about this, but was told, "What? Give publicity to Lily Marlene? No, you don't." And so it happened that months later, I came along and made a recording of the song which somehow got past the censor and was transmitted to Canada via London. I, too, was struck by the way our Canadian soldiers took to Lily Marlene. But what impressed me more was the fact that when we landed in Sicily, the peasants were singing it in the fields. And so, during the lull between the Sicilian and Italian campaigns, I hired a little local orchestra which included an operatic tenor to record Lily Marlene. It's a sad song, really, a sentimental song about a soldier's promise to meet his girl again beside a lamppost in the rain, a promise which is never kept. And even if you didn't understand it, as most of the Canadians didn't, there was its haunting tune. Sometime later, when we entered Berlin, I was to meet the composer Norbert Schulze and to learn the full story of Lily Marlene. It was a flop, he said, when it first came out. But the war came along, and the gramophone company tried to cash in by changing the name of the record from Lily Marlene to the Song of the Young God. But that didn't work, at least not immediately. The Germans were flushed with victory, and Wir fahren gegen England was their song. But the war went on, and the Wehrmacht took Radio Beograd and turned it into a forces station for the Africa Corps. Even the Nazis were growing tired when the soldier who was in charge of the new station looked through a pile of old records and saw the Song of the Young God and thought that it would be a good one to put on at 10 at lights out. He played it 3 nights running and then decided that it wasn't much good. But by then it was made. The German soldiers insisted that it be put on every night. A camp was named Lily Marlene by the Africa Corps, and a statue was put up to her on the road to Minsk in Russia. Lana Anderson, the girl who sang the song, was skyrocketed to fame. But poor Norbert Schulze only collected a few thousand marks in royalties because not many records could be made in war-short Germany. Not only were the Germans singing it, but the Allies as well. And in the end, the Germans did not sing it anymore, and only the Allies did. I have one of the original recordings of Lily Marlene. It was difficult to come by, and when I play it now, it reminds me of dark nights in Sicily, and the darker silhouettes of the olive trees, of the rain and mud in Italy, and the sound of the guns and comrades of old.
Peter Stursberg, now at the United Nations. Since 1952, our Paris correspondent, has been Douglas Lachance, formerly of Ottawa. His story is of recent events in France.
Like the time that making a routine political recording of a communist demonstration, I stood with open microphone in the Place de la République, and nearby police stopped a small black sedan from which they jerked a little fat man carrying a briefcase, whose sputters went down on my tape. That was Jacques Duclos, Secretary General of the French Communist Party. His arrest was first an international sensation, and then a subject of comedy, for the police searching his car found in the back 3 pigeons and in the front a radio. The police classified the first as carrier pigeons, obviously standard equipment for any spy, and the radio as a transmitter. Duclos was later able to prove that the pigeons had been both dead and standard birds of the eating variety given him by a friend. As for the radio, it turned out to be an ordinary car set which didn't even get police calls. Probably that occasion was memorable only for the excitement at the time and the humor of the official mismanagement afterwards. What other stories do I remember? Well, there was the Army Day Parade in May 54, the week after the fall of Dien Bien Phu, a parade the Laniel Cabinet did not dare to attend. President Coty alone reviewing the ranks of troops on the Champs-Élysées, while hundreds of thousands of shamed people stood in absolute silence to watch. And the next day, de Gaulle walking up the Champs-Élysées alone, while frightened police and troops kept watch and held back crowds lest he summon them to a coup d'etat. The aging general in the old brown uniform, but gray at the temples now, moving stiffly as always across the Place de l'Étoile, and standing at attention in front of the unknown soldier's grave and the eternal flame. And from everywhere, from all the thousands behind the police lines, surged up the Marseillaise chanted softly. Even the soldiers around the arc singing it too. Coming after a great national humiliation, the event had the relieving effect of tears after tragedy. There are other memories. Pierre Mendès-France coming to power soon after, milk drinking, happily buoyant, so unused to power he refused an official car at first and went everywhere in his battered old Citroën, while we of the press roared after. And when Mendes' cabinet fell, 4 a.m. last February 5th, the retiring premier trying to speak, merely to pass on advice about the budget, and the hundreds of mediocrities filled with hatred for the one Frenchman since the war who had tried to govern, screaming their venom so not one single word of his speech could be heard, and he had to make it to the official stenographer under the rain of cries, Jew, assassin, traitor. I've never considered these anecdotes together before, but I think now, looking at them, that they contain a common point. The French refuse to conform to the norm. All their activities have an element of comedy and tragedy. Whoever has the privilege of covering this country will find just watching its people react to history memorable in itself. This is Douglas Lachant speaking from Paris.
Finally, James M. Menifee reports regularly from Washington, but his choice tonight recalls the days when he was correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune and sent only occasional stories to his native Canada.
Just before Christmas 1941, I was sitting with a friend in a little hotel room in Washington, waiting for Wendell Willkie, the leader of the Republican Party, to come back from the White House. President Roosevelt had sent for him secretly. It was a grim time for the democracies. The American Pacific Fleet was sitting at the bottom on Pearl Harbor. The Japs were on the march. Great pressure was building up in the United States to concentrate on the Pacific and let Europe ride. It would have been the popular but fatal decision, and we wondered if Willkie were getting that pitch. He stumbled into the room. "I just can't tell you, fellows," he said. "He swore me to secrecy." We waited. Willkie could never keep a secret long. He took a deep breath. Then he whispered, "Churchill's coming." I had a flash of conviction. At that moment, I felt the tide was turning. I still believe that this was the furthest ebb. To be sure, many disasters were ahead. Singapore and Manila would fall. The battleships Repulse and Prince of Wales would be sunk. But Alamein was only 6 months ahead, and this made Alamein possible. At this Christmas, the Grand Alliance would be founded, the European struggle given priority, and Congress and the people reconciled to it. FDR and Churchill had a rendezvous with destiny. The two leaders gave a press conference, jointly, in the little oval room in the White House where the president worked. FDR sat at his cluttered desk. He had a cigarette in a long holder. Churchill sat beside him, pink and bland, with his inevitable cigar. Both were prima donnas, and I hoped that they were not getting in each other's hair. But obviously the two were getting along famously. As we crowded in, FDR leaned over to Churchill and said softly, nodding toward us, "They're an awful bunch of wolves, you know, and I'm going to throw you to them." Churchill chuckled. He answered the first question sitting down. Someone at the back shouted, "Can't hear you." And someone else said, "Or see you." Then the amazing man stood up. He climbed laboriously onto his chair, beamed at the reporters, waved his cigar, and gave the V sign. He said simply, "Here I am." That took care of the press. They forgot the tough questions they'd come to ask. Next day, he brought Congress into camp. They shouted with laughter when he commented to a joint session of the House and Senate, "If my father had been American and my mother British, instead of the other way around, I might have got here on my own." The nation bought him when he helped light the White House Christmas tree. Churchill was always a good assignment. That was the best of them. This is James M. Menifee in Washington.
This has been Assignment Abroad, a choice of stories by CBC foreign correspondents. Tonight's special program marked the 15 years of the CBC News Service which includes regular reporting from London, Paris, Washington, and the United Nations. This is the Dominion Network of the CBC.
I hope that you enjoyed this little trip into our past. If you have some old radio clips that you'd like to share for this segment of Ron's Amazing Stories, I'd love to hear them. Drop me an email at ronsamazingstories@gmail.com. Well, that's it for the first podcast of 2018. I hope you enjoyed it. We have many great programs coming your way, including a brand new Horror Express where the topic will be UFOs. That's going to be a fun show. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, it's so easy to do. Just head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find all of the links that you will need. We are on Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many, many other services. Pick one and do leave some feedback about the show. It really does help us to grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.